Hi friends, welcome back to TMYS Academy. Now, today I'm sitting with Sayantani Dasgupta, and we are going to talk about creative nonfiction and about her books. She is a professor of creative writing in North Carolina, and it's my great pleasure to invite her to this show. Thank you so much for joining us, Shantanu.
Thank you, Coral, for inviting me. It's a treat.
Thank you so much. So, Shantanu, I'll get directly into the questions, and there are some that our audience really wants to hear from you. Firstly, firstly, I will go into your books. So you have been a finalist for the Foreword Indies Awards for creative nonfiction. The first, let's start right from that particular word, which appears in literature, which appears for authors, but for a lot of people, they don't know that difference. So, what is creative nonfiction, and what is its significance in literature?
So, creative nonfiction as a term was originated in 1969 in the US as a way to differentiate between straight up journalism or the kind of writing one does, say, for an auto industry magazine, where it's kind of just hard facts and you're not really putting yourself in the center of the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And as in the writer, you are not sort of making yourself the main focus, you are making the subject the main focus. Creative nonfiction is the kind of writing where, say, you're writing a memoir, or you're writing a food book about your family, or a travel book about your experiences in Spain, or something like that. And it's nonfiction because it's rooted in reality. These things actually happened. You are not making it up, so it's not fictitious. It's coming from your imagination. But the creative part comes in because you're using elements from fiction, like how to write a good scene or how to write really compelling dialogues. Because, say, for example, normally when we talk to each other, we are not really paying attention to things like syntax, or we can be repetitive in some of the things we are saying to each other. We could have tics like or well, these sorts of things. But when you're writing, you want your dialogues to be very crisp. You want your dialogues to be very sharp. So you are editing all these extra things out. You're sort of fine tuning it. And that's where your creativity comes in as a writer. So you are still recording the conversation that happened. You are not making things up, but you're polishing it up. So that's really what creative nonfiction means, where you are using true real life stories, but you're just sort of shining up the surface so that the best version of that particular real event.
Okay. So, a lot of people, even in Tell Me Your Story, they write a lot of, just this term, the creative nonfiction thing, they write a lot of memoirs, but they don't know that they are writing creative nonfiction. So, given that we are talking about it, if you could just give us some insights on what are the skills required in case you are trying to write a memoir, because there are a lot of writers that we have who fictionalize their content, right? They're talking about things that appeared in their own life, but they don't want to talk about those things as appearing in their own lives. They try to fictionalize it, but they say the same thing. They don't try to manipulate whatever are the chain of occurrences.
Sure.
So for writing this kind of a genre, for writing memoirs, for writing creative nonfiction, what do you think are the basic skills that one must have, and if they don't have, they must develop?
I think first and foremost, the willingness to read, and this is irrespective of whatever kind of writing you want to do. I sometimes come across students or people in the community who want to write, and who want to write seriously, who want to publish books, but they don't read at all. So it's one thing to not read at all versus one thing to, if you say, I read the newspaper, I just follow current events articles, that's great. You are still reading, you are still sort of that muscle in practice. But to not read, when someone says, I don't like to read at all, I would hesitate to ask that person to write, because then you are not honoring what is already in place. And how can you expect others to engage with your writing if you are not engaging with someone else's writing? So first and foremost, the willingness to read a wide variety of things will only help as far as polishing your skills. Then secondly, to be a good memoirist, I don't think it's essential to have sort of a photographic memory of your life, or that you're required to remember everything that's ever happened to you. But you have to sort of spend some time figuring out, okay, if I want to write about why I specifically remember my 5th birthday party, but not my 6th birthday party, what does it mean? So the willingness to stay in a specific memory and the willingness to engage with a specific memory and understand why we remember what we remember. Because our conscious is a very powerful device. And if I assign a writing prompt to my students, and some of them might not write the first thing that comes to their mind because they want to write something that will make them perhaps sound smartest in the class or the wisest in the class. And I tell them to sort of refrain from that and listen to what their subconscious prompted them to write at the first instant itself. And so with memoir writing, I think it's important to trust your memory and sort of to know that I have to spend some time figuring out why I remember it, why something that happened when I was 5 years old continues to have importance in my life.
Okay. Reading per se, I mean, I feel that it's so much about research. I mean, a lot of people don't see reading as a research, they just see reading as an entertainment. But I so much feel that reading is like, trying to put your thoughts in one place and try to see that how other people are dealing with the same thought or the same ideology, and where do they fare, even if it is a reverse ideology, even if it is a reverse thought process. No?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So who are your favorite authors in the creative nonfiction space, and why do you choose them?
So I think I'm going to probably recommend 3 authors.
Yeah.
The first is my own professor, Kim Barnes, who was nominated for a Pulitzer right from her very first nonfiction book, which is In the Wilderness. And it's a memoir of her growing up in sort of the forests of Idaho, which is in the Northwest US. And in every which way, Kim's life is very different from mine because I grew up in New Delhi. And that's definitely not the forests of Northwest US in any which way. And yet, when I read her book, there were so many moments of identification and commonality. And that really is why we read in the first place, right? We read a variety of things to find our humanity and our common story. And so it was one of the first nonfiction books that did that for me. And so I always recommend that. The second is the author Roxane Gay, who writes fiction, poetry, creative nonfiction. I really love her creative nonfiction. And she does a lot of, I want to say, experimentation in her work. She is unafraid. She will write about the most, I think, sort of personal, vulnerable things that one could write about. And that kind of bravery is astonishing and very, very inspiring. And the third is an Indian author, Indian writer, Orvi Sharma. And Orvi's essays are filled with Indian mythology, history, and just sort of they have a very Indian aesthetic to them. And I am just so deeply impressed by all the sort of mental gymnastics and intelligence with which she crafts her essays. So I think these 3 essayists would be my top picks.
Superb. So, as a professor of creative writing, how do you, or what kind of intervention do you see yourself doing with your students? Because the reason why I ask you this is the students don't come to you at a very nascent stage. They are not children that you can, you can mold the soft soil. They already come with their own biases, with their own thought processes, which could be very strong at times. So, what kind of intervention do you see yourself coming with in such cases?
Well, I think everybody obviously has their own teaching method. I really try to make sure that they're getting this point very clearly, that research is fundamental to any kind of writing. Even if you're writing the quote unquote simplest of poems, or sort of you're reimagining a fairy tale or anything like that, research is fundamental. And research does not have to be boring. Research need not be boring at all, provided you pick subjects that you're really deeply interested in. So if you think that this is going to be, oh, very boring school homework research, then of course it's going to be boring and it's not going to be interesting for anyone. But if you take it up in the sense that I'm going to research things that really interest me, be it, I don't know, astronomy or oceanography or Thousand Leagues Under the Sea, whatever that might be, I think your own interest will carry it through. And therefore it's important to choose subjects, to choose topics that are of interest to you, that won't bore you after the first couple of days of writing. So research is very, very important to my own teaching style and narrative. The second, I think, and I'm trying to be better at this, is how to treat your characters with empathy. So very recently I read David Sedaris's collection of essays called Dress Your Family in Corduroy and Denim. And it's a collection of personal essays about his family. And there are many characters in there that are either from his family or outside. And what's beautiful is that he treats everyone with kindness, even though they are not always kind to him in real life. And kindness, I don't mean that he sugarcoats anything. He tells the story the way it is. So some people are kind of, portrayed nuts and bolts, and they might not come across as the most lovable people. But he treats everyone with empathy. He treats it with the kind of respect that you would want from someone you disagree with, because everyone need not agree with you, but everyone should treat you with respect, whoever you are. And that's something that I'm trying to be better at in my own writing, and I'm trying to sort of teach my own students that this is something to sort of keep in mind, because nonfiction should not feel like this is my chance to sort of take revenge on everyone who has ever hurt me, and I my side of the story and it will be perfect. But the beauty of nonfiction is that you also have to analyze yourself and your actions and where all you faltered. And I think to also treat yourself with empathy. And for something like that, I think David Sedaris is a really good example to follow. So I think these two things, and maybe also experimentation, to not be afraid of trying new forms, to pick up literary forms from pretty much anywhere on the planet and see what we can achieve by imitating it. So I think these three things, yeah.
Okay. Sayantani, both you and I are, in fact, most of us are obsessive readers, and we are quite happy about that. I mean, that's our little world, which we protect with everything that we can. And
right.
So probably we have read a lot of Indian authors as well as authors who are born and brought up outside, beyond our culture. Something that I really wanted to ask you is, when there is a cross-cultural, when a book is not from our culture, when there is a cross-culture connect, at such a time, how does, for example, if someone is writing a memoir, how does that person's memory resonate so well with us? Even though we don't belong to his world, we don't belong to his culture, we don't understand what kind of people would probably behave in that way or talk in that way, So how do you think that kind of a connect gets established when we are reading stories or memoirs or any kind of writing for them?
Right. There is a powerful memoir called First They Killed My Father. Yeah. And it's set in Cambodia. And this is set in the 1970s, right after the insurrections in Cambodia. And of course, it's a terrifying, powerful book. And for most of us who are reading that book, that's probably not our reality.
Yeah.
That we did not have to become sort of refugees overnight, and we were not dragged out of our homes. And of course, that is a reality for a lot of people in the world right now, but probably not for everyone reading the book, right? And time and again, that is one of the books that I have had the most success as far as teaching is concerned, because students really, I think, understand not just the harrowing aspects of the book, but it's written from a child's perspective. And so I think that is so universal, because you are kind of figuring things out. You want to be grown up very quickly, and you want to sort of take your own decisions very quickly. And yet the world is confusing. And that is definitely one of the most common experiences we all share. Having said that, I'm not at all saying that everyone should write their memoirs from the point of view of a child, because that's also not realistic. And even though this particular book is from the perspective of a child, you know that it is an adult writing it through the lens of a child. So of course, that's not something I'm recommending for everyone. But I think what is important is to be very truthful to your memories, to be very specific, to not be generic. The more specific you are to your story, the more oddly, the more universal it is. So talk about, so for example, if I write about some of the more frightening nuns at my school in New Delhi, find a resonance with people, I think, who have dealt with harsh teachers and unkind teachers no matter where, right? It doesn't matter that they have had to be, they have also attended the same Catholic institution that I did in New Delhi. They could be anywhere, but they will identify with authority figures from their own lives who have also been unkind or unfair to them. So I think the more specific, the more universal, and that is definitely a way to sort of show we are all kind of struggling or making sense of similar stories.
Okay, finally, the last question. We would like you to share some tips for our short story writers and other aspiring authors, which you believe will help enhance their skills. One, of course, is reading, which you have already mentioned. What else?
I like to give a lot of imitation exercises to my students.
Yes,
so, for example, if there is a particular story you have liked, it doesn't matter whether it's a fairy tale, it's a folk tale, or it's a contemporary story. I often encourage students to write a companion piece to that. So if, say, the story is Cinderella, I mean, everybody knows Cinderella's story, but what might be a companion piece to that? Maybe it's a second part of Cinderella. What happens when she has been married for 5 months and she and the prince have their first fight? Or what happens when one of the sisters, one of the evil stepsisters, has a change of heart and perhaps comes and asks for forgiveness? So just to sort of carry on the narrative and exercise imagination and see how each of these characters might behave in different circumstances. So I'm therefore a big fan of imitation exercises, both with fiction as well as nonfiction, and even poetry for that matter. Another thing that I use a lot is, of course, reading, but reading from countries that we don't know much about. Because oftentimes when I was a student in India, and even now, most of the literature I think that we come across in English is either from the US or from UK, or say some rare cases it might be from Australia or South Africa or South Asia. But what about the incredible storytelling traditions in countries like Egypt, perhaps, that a person from India might not be reading about on a daily basis? So I think there is a lot to say about how stories are told, the style of storytelling, and to find places that you know nothing about and pick up stories from there, whether it's a famous author or not. And then seeing, okay, what strategy is this author incorporating? And how can I incorporate that in my writing? Did this story start with a big chunk of description of a place? Did this story start with dialogue? Did it start with an inner monologue? What did it start with? And how can I use that in, say, ABC story that I'm working on right now? So yeah, I think these would be my suggestions for that.
Okay, Shantani. So what I'll do is, I have taken down notes while you were talking. So what I'll do is I will try to just, bullet out certain things that you said, which might help our audience. And if you feel that I have missed out on something, please feel free to add.
I will do that.
Yeah, so first thing is, reading is as good as research. Reading is fundamental, and you cannot compromise on reading in any way. If you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader.
Yes.
Second is, Writing is not a photographic memory of something that has happened in your life. The idea is to recreate the moments and rebuild engagement for a greater audience. Till now, something has happened in your life. Now it has to go out to a greater audience if you're trying to be a writer. So try to build that audience, that engagement, and hence that polishing.
Right.
Third is research is a very fundamental thing in any kind of writing. So it's up to you how interesting you can make your research. You have to use your creativity, because if you are wanting to be a writer, you cannot be a non-creative person. And if you're a creative person, it's your duty to make your research interesting.
Right.
Fourth is generalize your cause and you will find your audience. Whatever be your cause for remembering a story, try to find out, try to generalize it, try to find out in a bigger, broader circumference, and you will find that there are lots of audience who are hooking into it because of something
Right.
that from where your story emerged.
I'm wondering if we should replace generalize with a different word, though.
Yes,
because generalize, I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, because generalize might sort of give someone the impression that it doesn't have to be specific. Whereas that's not what I'm saying at all, so how should we say it? Like, pick stories that will not necessarily have universal appeal, but I mean, pick stories that have been very important to you, of course. And then what might be a way for that story to resonate with a wider audience, right? But don't pick the most ordinary experiences of your life. My first school, I cried. That's okay. That's not perhaps. But my first day of school, I decided to run away with my best friend. I mean, that's a story. So I think choosing your story is important, and choosing how to tell that story. Does that make sense?
I mean, I feel that even if you're picking up a very ordinary aspect of your life, the way you are telling makes a lot of difference. I mean, you see Ruskin
Yes.
Bond. Ruskin Bond
Yeah.
says the most simplest things of his life, but he says it in a way that we are hooked to it. We want to read his
Absolutely.
They're
Right.
takes on us without being thrillers, right? So
Yes.
So it has a lot to do with the presentation, and I think for Bond, when I read, I feel that he is reaching out to the lowest levels, and he reaches out so much in style that it reaches out till the highest level. There is no hierarchy.
Right. And it's incredibly difficult to write the way Ruskin Bond does, because it is so it reads effortlessly.
Yeah.
Right. And we know that it's the simple that actually takes the hardest amount of work and editing, because most non-writers would probably try to use the biggest words they can to try and appear, smart or whatever, or intellectual. But and this is something in David Sedaris also, and of course Bond does this so well, again with that question of empathy and kindness towards your characters, and the language.
A lot of innocence as well.
I'm sorry?
And a lot of innocence as well.
That's right, yeah.
He doesn't try to impress you. He is very innocently like a child trying to tell you whatever is there.
Right. And then you can make up your own mind about the story.
Exactly.
It's just sort of the conduit. He's not telling you, instructing you in that sense. And that's just so lovely. So yeah, I absolutely agree with, it could be the simplest story, but how you tell it makes a big difference. Yeah, good point.
And finally, you spoke about the imitation exercises that you do with your students, which I found a really, really excellent writing prompt example that you had given. Like from an existing story, which everybody knows about, try to think what may have happened after, what may have happened before, or if something becomes different, then how the entire story changes. I mean, that's a fabulous thing that you have told us. Definitely a very strong takeaway for our audience. Thank you so much, Sayantani. It was fabulous.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Totally my pleasure. Thank you so much.